my daddy's lonely too. And Mommy's gone, but he still talks to her picture every night. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. The woman looked at me. For the first time, really looked. There was something between us, no recognition, but an undeniable tension. Then, she reached into her clutch, pulled out a business card, and handed it to me. "I think we should talk," she said quietly. Before I could respond, she stood, nodded once, and walked away, her heels echoing against the polished floor. I stared at the card. It had only her name, Vivian Holloway, and a number, no company, no title. But the name rang like a bell in my brain. I'd heard it before. I just didn't know where. As I stood there, still reeling from what had just happened, Lily tugged at my sleeve again. She smiled when I said it, Daddy. "I think she wants to marry you." I chuckled nervously, heart still racing. "Come on, let's get that ice cream." But my mind wasn't on dessert. It was on the strange, elegant woman who looked at my daughter like she was a missing piece of a puzzle long forgotten. And the business card in my hand felt heavier than any paper should. Cliffhanger. I didn't know it then, but that moment would unravel a history neither of us was ready to face. My heart didn't just stop. It folded in on itself, trying to make sense of what my daughter had just said out loud in front of a stranger, in front of the world. Her innocent voice echoed in the high-ceilinged mall, cutting through the soft hum of conversation and footsteps, silencing everyone within earshot. "Will you marry my daddy?" I could barely breathe. Vivian didn't react immediately. She stood in stunned silence, lips parted slightly as if trying to form a response. Her perfectly composed posture faltered. Her hand, still clutching that elegant designer bag, trembled just enough for me to notice. Then, without warning, she laughed, a short, surprised sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. It wasn't mockery. It was confusion. Or maybe something even deeper. Something broken. People were staring now. Curious glances turned into shameless gawking. A mother nearby pulled her child a little closer, and I saw a young couple, whispering behind their hands. I wanted to disappear, to vanish into the floor tiles, to pretend this hadn't just happened. My face burned, my palms were sweaty, and I knew I had to say something, anything, to clean up the mess. "I'm so sorry," I said quickly, bending down to pick Lily up. She doesn't understand what—" Vivian held up her hand again, silencing me with that same graceful command she'd used earlier. But this time, it wasn't to dismiss. She turned her attention to Lily, her brows knitted together. Not in irritation, but in concern. She bent down slowly until she was eye level with her, the expensive fabric of her white dress brushing against the marble floor like it belonged there. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "why would you ask me that? Why would you want me to marry your daddy?" Her tone had changed. Gone was the elegance, the polished cadence. What remained was raw and vulnerable, almost maternal. It caught me off guard, and apparently, it caught Vivian off guard too, because she blinked rapidly, as if fighting something inside her that she hadn't felt in years. Lily, ever unafraid, ever honest, looked at her with wide eyes and shrugged. "Because you look really sad. Like Daddy. And he talks to Mommy's photo every night. He says he misses her, but she can't come back. And you look like you miss someone too." Vivian didn't speak. She didn't blink. Her body swayed just slightly, and then, before I could catch her, she lowered her head and covered her mouth with one hand. I thought she might cry, but she didn't. Instead, she took a slow, trembling breath and looked up at me. That was the first time our eyes truly locked. Not in apology, not in awkwardness, but in a strange, deep recognition neither of us could explain. "I didn't mean to make things weird," I said, feeling the words trip over themselves. She's always been this way." Honest to a fault, Vivian shook her head slowly. No. She just said something I wasn't ready to hear. Her voice cracked slightly at the end, and this time she didn't hide it. She pulled a small, gold-trimmed handkerchief from her bag and dabbed her eyes carefully, trying not to ruin her makeup. But the tears weren't loud. They weren't messy. They were quiet, controlled, like someone who had cried in silence for far too long. I wanted to ask what she meant, but something told me now wasn't the time. She turned back to Lily. "You're very smart, you know that?" Lily smiled proudly and nodded. "You remind me of someone I used to know." There was pain in that sentence, sharp and unresolved. Vivian reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. It was thick, matte black, with her name embossed in gold foil, Vivian Holloway. She handed it to me with a look that was more than curiosity. It was a silent plea. "Call me," she said, her voice lower now, almost a whisper. "Soon." Then, without waiting for my response, she stood and walked away. Her heels clacked against the floor, echoing like punctuation marks to a chapter I hadn't realized had just begun. No security, no entourage, just her, walking away with her arms crossed tightly against her chest, as if holding herself together. I stood there, not knowing what to do. People slowly returned to their shopping. The moment had passed, but the energy lingered. It was like standing in the eye of a storm, wondering when the winds would return. Lily tugged on my sleeve. She was nice. "Yeah," I said, still dazed. She was. I slipped the business card into my jacket pocket and tried to shake off the strange feeling clinging to me. We went and got the ice cream I promised. Lily picked strawberry with extra sprinkles. She giggled the whole time, completely unaware of how profoundly her words had shaken a stranger. And her father. That night, after I put her to bed, I pulled out the card again. I sat on the couch, the apartment dim except for the flicker of the TV, and stared at her name. Something about it kept tugging at my brain. I opened my laptop and typed Vivian Holloway into the search bar. The results lit up instantly. Headlines, photos, interviews, stock images of her at charity galas, shaking hands with presidents, standing in front of luxury hotels in Paris and Tokyo. Chief executive officer of a multinational hospitality empire, billionaire, philanthropist, household name. And I was standing in the middle of a food court in worn-out sneakers, holding a strawberry-stained child's hand, apologizing for an ice cream-fueled proposal. But it wasn't just that she was rich. It was how much influence she carried. She wasn't just someone with money. She was someone with power. Power that changed things. Power that could break things. I closed the laptop and leaned back, my thoughts racing. Why had she cried? Why had she looked at Lily like she recognized her? What had my daughter seen in her? And most importantly, what exactly had Vivian Holloway seen in us? I didn't know it then, but that small black card she handed me would become the key to unraveling a secret buried deeper than either of us could have imagined. After Lily had gone to sleep that night, wrapped in her favorite blanket and holding a teddy bear that had seen better days, I sat at the edge of my couch with Vivian Holloway's business card in my hand. The name still echoed in my head. So familiar, so distinct. And yet, until that afternoon, she was just another stranger in a mall. That changed the moment I typed her name into the search bar. The results flooded my screen instantly. Her name wasn't just in the news, it was carved into it. Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Business Insider. Article after article painted a picture of a woman who didn't just live in the world of the elite, she dominated it. CEO of Holloway Global Holdings, a multinational hospitality empire that spanned 5 continents. She wasn't just managing luxury hotels, she owned them. Her face was attached to multi-million-dollar foundations, environmental causes, scholarships, women's shelters. She was celebrated, adored, feared, depending on who was writing the piece. But amidst the glittering facade of her success, one article caught my eye. It wasn't about her business. It was an old interview tucked between financial briefings and photographs from some Paris fundraiser. The headline was simple: The one thing money couldn't buy. Vivian Holloway opens up about her greatest loss. My heart clenched before I even clicked. In the interview, she described a moment from decades ago, one that was veiled in vague language, but the message was clear. She had lost someone. Not in a tragic breakup, not in a business deal, but something personal, something life-altering. I used to believe I could fix anything if I just worked hard enough, she had said. But some things are taken from you so quietly, so cruelly, that by the time you notice the hole they left behind, it's already part of who you are. No names, no dates, no details, just a look in her eyes captured in the photograph beside the quote, haunted, distant, and unmistakably hollow. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about how she looked at Lily, that flinch when Lily mentioned her mother, the quiet pain in her voice when she said, "You remind me of someone I used to know." I didn't believe in coincidences. Not anymore. Not when something this strange was pulling at the corners of my life, like a thread unraveling everything I thought was stable. I sent her a message the next morning. Brief, polite, almost formal. "Thank you for your kindness yesterday. If you're still open to talking, I'd be honored to buy you a coffee." She replied 10 minutes later. "There's a small cafe on Hawthorne and 6th. Noon I arrived early, too nervous to think straight. I wore my only good shirt, the one I usually saved for interviews or school events. It still had a tiny stain near the collar, no matter how hard I scrubbed. She arrived precisely on time, dressed far more casually than I'd expected. Jeans, a dark sweater, sunglasses, and no visible jewelry. She looked like she was trying to be invisible. But even toned down, she radiated presence. The kind you don't learn. The kind you earn through survival. We ordered drinks, sat down near a window, and for a few minutes, neither of us said anything. She stirred her coffee with a tiny silver spoon, eyes fixed on the swirling cream, like she was watching memories take shape. "I did some reading," I said eventually. She smiled faintly. "I assumed you would. I saw the interview. The one where you mentioned a loss." Her smile faded. "That was a long time ago. But not over, is it?" She looked at me, and for the first time there was no wall, no performance, no polished exterior. Just a woman worn down by the weight of something she couldn't outrun. "No," she said. "It's not over." Not even close, I waited, not wanting to push too hard. But she leaned forward, her voice softer now, almost fragile. "Can I ask you something personal?" I nodded. "Lily, her mother. What happened to her?" I didn't expect the question to come so directly. I took a breath, steadying myself, and told her the truth. She died the day Lily was born. Complications. It was fast. The doctors tried everything, but it wasn't enough. I held Lily in one arm, and her mother's hand in the other as she slipped away. Vivian closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, they were glassy but defiant. "She never told me," she whispered. I furrowed my brows. "Told you what?" She looked down at her hands, then back at me, and something in her face cracked, just slightly. "When I was 19, she said, "I was in love with someone my family didn't approve of. He wasn't rich, he wasn't ambitious. He just made me feel seen, alive. My father found out I was pregnant. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten. He just handled it, quietly, ruthlessly. Within days, I was sent overseas to a clinic he trusted. I was told the child would be adopted, that I wasn't allowed to know anything. It was handled like a business transaction. Papers, signatures, silence." My chest tightened. "I never even knew if it was a boy or girl," she continued. "I wasn't allowed to see the baby." I begged, I cried, I screamed, but by the time I returned home, the child was gone, and the man I loved had disappeared. My father had paid him to leave, and I became what they wanted. Cold, polished, powerful, but hollow. She paused, eyes locked on mine, trembling. "And then yesterday, your daughter looked up at me, and for a moment I saw myself. Not just a resemblance, something deeper, familiar. Her eyes, her voice, her soul. My mind was racing, trying to connect timelines, possibilities, facts. "You think—" I started, but she nodded before I could finish. "I don't know for certain," she said, "but I need to find out. Please. Let me meet her again. Let me try to understand why it felt like the universe dropped her into my path." I couldn't speak. There were too many emotions tangled inside me. Confusion, hope, fear, disbelief. All I could do was nod. Vivian reached across the table and gently touched my hand. "I don't want to intrude," she said. "But if there's even the slightest chance, I need to know who your wife was, her name, where she grew up." When you met, I hesitated, then told her. And as I spoke, her face changed. Piece by piece, the pain transformed into shock, into recognition, into something I couldn't yet define. Then she told me something that made me question everything I thought I knew. We sat there in the quiet corner of that cafe, sunlight pouring through the window beside us, illuminating everything except the dark truth she was about to tell me. Her fingers trembled as they held the edge of her coffee cup, now cold and untouched. Her eyes weren't just red from emotion, they were swollen from years of holding in a story she never thought she'd share. "I was 19, she began, her voice distant, as if speaking to someone far away. "Barely out of high school. I'd just fallen in love for the first time, genuinely, deeply. Not the kind of love you plan around wealth or power, but the kind that sneaks up on you and makes you forget the world. He was kind, humble, worked at a bookstore. He didn't know who I was at first. And when he did, he didn't care. That's why I loved him." She paused, and I saw a version of her I hadn't imagined. Young, vulnerable, real. Not the CEO in tailored clothes, but the girl behind the empire, silenced long before she built it. We talked about running away, about a small house in a quiet town, about building a life without expectations or bloodline obligations. But my father, he was always watching. When he found out I was pregnant, he didn't confront me in anger. He simply made it clear that my life was no longer mine. I didn't interrupt. I could feel where this was going, and it hurt more with every word. He said I had one job, to protect the family name, that no child of mine would be born into scandal. He had connections everywhere. Within 2 days, I was sent to a private clinic in Switzerland under a false name. The staff were polite, professional, cold. I was treated like a contract, someone to be processed, not a person to be protected. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. I begged to see the baby after delivery. They refused. I never held her. I never even saw her face. They told me she would be placed with a suitable family, and that it was better this way. For everyone. My chest tightened as I listened. I couldn't imagine what it meant to carry a life for 9 months and be denied the very first moment of connection. She didn't need to describe the pain in detail. I could see it pouring out of her. My father told me she didn't survive, Vivian continued, that it was a difficult birth, that she was too small. He gave me a death certificate and told me to move on. But I never believed it. Not truly. Not in my soul. Tears rolled freely now. There was no need for her to hide them. Not here. Not with this story. For years, I searched. Quietly, carefully, using private investigators under false contracts. But there were no records, no leads, just dead ends. I convinced myself that maybe I had gone mad, that maybe he was right. But then, she looked up at me. Then your daughter stood in front of me, and I saw her eyes. I didn't know what to say. "She looks exactly like me," she whispered. At that age, not just the shape, the color, the intensity, the way she squints when she smiles. It was like looking into a mirror I forgot existed. I leaned forward slightly, still unsure what I was supposed to feel. It was too wild, too impossible, but I couldn't ignore the raw truth in her voice. She wasn't telling this story for attention or pity. She was telling it because she needed to. because something deep inside her had clicked into place. You think she might be... I couldn't finish the sentence. My granddaughter, she said, finishing it for me. The word landed like a thunderclap. I sat back, processing what it meant, if it was true. You said your wife died during childbirth, Vivian added carefully. What do you know about her parents? Her past? I swallowed hard. Not much. She was raised in foster care. Her records were vague. She never talked about her biological family, only that she'd been placed in the system as a newborn. She always said she didn't need to know. She had me, and then she had Lily Vivian closed her eyes. That would make sense. If my father faked a death certificate, it's possible he placed her in the system under a fabricated identity. It would explain why she vanished. My hands were shaking now. This was more than just a painful backstory. It was a bombshell. A possibility that the woman I'd loved, who had died in my arms, was her daughter. That Lily was her only living blood relative. How can we know for sure? I asked, my voice tight. A DNA test, she said quickly. I already contacted someone I trust. They can do a discrete analysis. We just need a small sample from Lily. Hair, saliva. I'll pay for everything. I hesitated. It wasn't that I didn't want to know. It was that the idea terrified me. What if it was true? What would that mean for Lily? For me? She saw my hesitation and softened her tone. I'm not trying to take her from you, Adam. I promise. But if there's even a chance, I need to know. Not for the media, not for legacy, for me. For the part of me that still remembers what it felt like to carry a child and have her ripped away before I ever got to call her mine. There was no calculation in her voice, no angle, just pain. I agreed. We met again a few days later at a small park where Lily loved to play. Vivian stayed at a distance, watching quietly as I brushed hair from Lily's jacket collar and tucked a few strands into a Ziploc bag. Lily didn't even notice. She was too busy chasing butterflies near the flower beds. Vivian took the sample, thanked me with tears in her eyes, and promised we'd have results soon. That night, I didn't sleep. What if she was right? What if my late wife had spent her life never knowing she was the daughter of one of the most powerful women in the country? What if Lily was a bridge between two worlds that had been forcibly torn apart? Days passed like molasses. I checked my phone every hour, waiting for an update, wondering what would happen if the answer was yes, wondering what would happen if it was number. Then the call came. Vivian's voice trembled through the speaker. We need to talk. In person, I could hear something else in her voice. Something beyond shock. The test results didn't just confirm her fears. They uncovered a betrayal decades in the making. When I answered the phone that morning, I already knew what Vivian was going to say. Something in the way her voice trembled with urgency. The night before told me the results had arrived. But hearing her say the words, nothing could have prepared me for how deeply they'd land. It's positive, she said softly, barely above a whisper. Lily is my granddaughter. For a long moment, I didn't speak. I sat there in my kitchen, coffee cooling in my hand, staring blankly at the window as if the truth might appear in the frost of the glass. I felt both numb and overwhelmed. I should have expected this. Part of me did. But the confirmation turned possibility into permanence. Vivian exhaled shakily on the other end of the line. That means, your wife, Lily's mother, was my daughter. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with 30 years of unanswered questions, missed milestones, and grief that had never had a name. Vivian didn't cry right away. She didn't scream. She didn't even speak. What I heard was the kind of silence that comes from someone watching a dam break inside themselves. The kind of collapse that takes more than a moment to show on the outside. We met that afternoon at a private room in one of her hotels. She didn't want to talk about this in public. Her usual polished appearance was absent. She looked small, human, tired in a way that makeup couldn't fix and wealth couldn't disguise. She held the DNA report in her hands like it was both a miracle and a curse. "I missed everything," she said, staring at the page. Her first steps, her first word, every birthday, every tear. I missed being her mother because someone else decided I didn't deserve to be one. Her voice cracked, and she dropped the paper onto the table. Her hands trembled as she reached for a glass of water. I sat across from her, unsure of how to comfort a woman who had just learned her child lived and died without ever knowing who she was. "She was incredible," I said, finally finding my voice. "Smart, fierce, funny in this quiet, sarcastic way that took people by surprise. She was good with numbers, terrible with directions, and never once went to sleep angry." Vivian's eyes brimmed with tears. "She used to hum while washing dishes. The same tune every time, even though she said she didn't realize she was doing it. She loved old movies, the black and white kind, and every Sunday morning she made pancakes that were always a little burnt, no matter how hard she tried." Vivian smiled through the tears. "She sounds like someone I would have been proud to know. You would have been proud to raise her," I said. "She was strong. Stronger than she knew." Vivian wept then, not the silent tears of earlier, but full, broken sobs. I didn't stop her. I couldn't. I let her fall apart in front of me, the same way I had years ago in a hospital room, holding my newborn in one arm and the hand of a woman I couldn't save in the other. It wasn't just grief pouring out of Vivian. It was guilt. It was every question she'd asked herself, in the dark, every what if she had buried beneath decades of board meetings and photo ops. "She died not knowing the truth," Vivian said between sobs. "She never knew I fought for her. That I never stopped looking. She knew she was loved," I said gently. "She didn't need a history to know her worth. She created it herself." For hours, we talked. I told her about how we met, on a rainy college campus, when I slipped and dropped coffee all over her notes, and she yelled at me with such fire that I fell in love on the spot. I told her about our tiny wedding in a friend's backyard, about the way she held her belly when she first felt Lily kick, about the fear in her eyes when the labor came too early, too fast, and how, in her last breath, she whispered, "Tell her I love her more than anything." Vivian listened to every word as if each syllable was a thread pulling her closer to the daughter she lost. We cried together, two strangers bound by a shared love for someone no longer alive to speak for herself. There was something surreal about it all. Our lives had crossed in the most improbable way. A chance encounter at a mall, a child's innocent question, and now we sat in a room heavy with grief and healing, rebuilding something we didn't know was broken until it fell into our hands. Vivian wiped her tears and looked at me with resolve. "I want to be in Lily's life," she said. "Not because I deserve it, but because she does. She deserves to know where she comes from, to know she's part of something bigger, not just wealth or status, but history, family." I nodded. "She adores you already. But we take this slow, on her terms. She's still a child. I'll follow her pace," she promised. "I'm not here to replace anyone. I'm here to honor the memory of the daughter I lost and to love the granddaughter I've been gifted." It was a promise I believed. But just as the air between us began to soften, just as we started to feel the edges of something new, something healing, there was a knock at the door. A sharp, confident knock that didn't wait for permission to open. Vivian's face went pale. The door swung open and a man stepped inside. Tall, silver-haired, expensively dressed, cold as steel, his presence changed the energy of the room instantly. "Vivian," he said, "we need to talk." Now I didn't need an introduction. I knew who he was, the man from her past, the one who orchestrated the loss of a daughter and the silence that followed. Her father. Just when I thought we were healing, someone from her past showed up, bringing with him the power to destroy everything we had just begun to rebuild. He stepped into the room like he owned it. Not just the space, but the air, the silence, the fear. Everything shifted the moment he appeared. Vivian stiffened as if someone had pulled a string inside her, yanking her back into a version of herself she thought she had buried. I didn't need an introduction. His presence alone spoke volumes. This was the man who had controlled her life like a chessboard. Her father. He closed the door behind him without taking his eyes off me. They were sharp, calculating, not scanning for understanding, but for weakness. His suit was tailored to perfection, every thread shouting power, legacy, control. But it was the way he looked at me that told me exactly who he was. Not just a father, not just a mogul, but a man who had made decisions that ruined lives and never looked back. "I've been reading the news," he said, voice smooth but laced with venom. "Imagine my surprise, seeing my daughter's name linked to a child in a shopping mall." Vivian stood up, her chair sliding slightly behind her. Her voice was flat but firm. "You don't get to come here and speak like that." He ignored her, eyes still locked on me. "And you? What did you think you'd get out of this? A trust fund? A house? A book deal, maybe?" I rose slowly, not because I was intimidated, but because I didn't want Lily's name spoken like a weapon. "All I've ever wanted is for my daughter to be loved. If you think this is about money, you've already missed the point." He scoffed. "Don't lecture me on love. You know nothing about my family." "No," I said, calm but deliberate. "But I know what you took from yours." That was when Vivian stepped in between us. "For years, I let you control me," she said, her voice rising. "You told me what to wear, what to study, who I could be seen with. You tore my life apart because you thought protecting our reputation was more important than protecting your daughter. And now, you want to do it again. I did what needed to be done," he snapped. "I built an empire. You were set to inherit it. I wasn't about to let you throw it away on some teenage romance and an illegitimate child." Vivian didn't flinch. Her name was Evelyn. She was my daughter, and she deserved more than to be erased like a scandal. "She was a mistake," he said coldly. "And now this child, this Lily, she's your second chance to make the same one." It happened so fast I didn't even realize the security guards had entered until the tension hit a peak. Vivian turned and pointed toward the door. "Get him out." Now he looked stunned for the first time. "You're making a mistake," he warned. "One you can't undo." Vivian didn't blink. "I'd rather lose everything than live under your shadow one more day." The guards escorted him out, his voice echoing behind him. "You'll regret this. All of you will." The door closed. Silence fell. She didn't sit down right away. Her hands trembled, her chest rose and fell too quickly. She had just stood up to the man who had shaped her entire world. Publicly, emotionally, definitively. And in doing so, she had broken a cycle that had lasted her entire life. But the cost came faster than we expected. Within 24 hours, the story had hit every major outlet. Photos of Vivian and Lily at the mall, headlines speculating on secret adoptions, anonymous sources claiming she was giving up her position at the company for a child she just met. There were opinion pieces, rumors, even late-night jokes. They called her impulsive, unstable, emotional, words they reserved for women who made powerful choices the world didn't understand. And then, the real storm began. Her company's board members issued a statement distancing themselves from her actions. Stock prices began to dip. Reporters camped outside her house, my apartment, Lily's school. The world had taken something delicate and sacred and twisted it into spectacle. I watched Vivian try to hold it all together. In front of Lily, she smiled, laughed, asked about homework, learned to braid hair. But behind closed doors, I saw her unraveling. Late-night phone calls with lawyers, silence over untouched meals, eyes red from crying when she thought no one was looking. "I thought I could balance both," she said to me one night, as we sat on my worn-out couch, the apartment dim except for the light from the kitchen. "Family and business." But I was wrong. "You can still do both," I said, reaching for her hand. "You just have to redefine what success looks like." But she shook her head. Every camera, every headline, every boardroom meeting. It's all reminding me who I used to be. And I'm starting to realize that maybe I can't be both people anymore. Not like this. I didn't know how to respond. She wasn't just losing her reputation. She was watching the world she built turn on her for the crime of loving the wrong people at the right time. I need to disappear, she whispered. Not forever. Just long enough to let things settle. I need space to breathe, to think, to choose who I want to be without them deciding it for me. I felt like something inside me was being ripped open. So, you're leaving? She looked at me, eyes full of everything she couldn't say out loud. I want to come back. But right now, I don't know who I am. And I can't be a grandmother, a partner, and a CEO while the world's tearing me apart from every side. I didn't beg her to stay, because I understood. Sometimes, love means letting someone go so they can come back whole. She kissed Lily on the forehead the next morning, held her a little too long, and promised to call soon. Then she slipped into a waiting car and vanished into the early morning fog. I thought she was leaving to heal, but the decision she made next would tear us all apart in ways none of us could have seen coming. It happened quietly. So quietly, in fact, that I didn't even realize it at first. There was no dramatic goodbye, no tense argument, no drawn-out farewell with promises of return. Just one morning, she was gone. The scent of her perfume still lingered faintly in the air. Her toothbrush was missing from the bathroom. The blanket she liked to use on the couch was neatly folded, as if she had every intention of returning. But she didn't. I called her phone immediately, confused and concerned. The number rang once, then went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. By midday, the number wasn't even ringing. It had been disconnected entirely. I reached out to her assistant, the only contact I had from her business side. The reply came hours later, formal and clipped. Miss, Holloway is traveling indefinitely and is currently unavailable for communication. She appreciates your understanding. Understanding? I had none. I stood in the kitchen that night, the silence in the apartment somehow louder than anything I'd ever heard. Lily was in her room, coloring quietly. The TV was off. My phone sat useless in my hand. There were no answers, just a sudden, cold absence where warmth had lived only yesterday. Days turned into weeks. Each morning, Lily would wake up and ask if Vivian had called, if she was coming over, if she was going to bring her favorite strawberry muffins again. I'd smile, lie, and say, maybe tomorrow. But inside, I was unraveling. Because even though I tried to stay calm for my daughter, I knew something wasn't right. Lily began to ask different questions. Did I do something wrong? Did she stop liking us? Why doesn't she want to be our family anymore? And then came the worst question of all. Is she gone like Mommy? I couldn't answer that one, not honestly, because deep down I didn't know. She had left without saying goodbye, not just to me, but to Lily. And that, more than anything, was the knife that kept twisting. I replayed everything in my head 1,000 times. Had I missed a sign? Was there a conversation I'd misunderstood? Had she ever really intended to stay? The uncertainty gnawed at me like an invisible hand around my throat. Some nights I sat at the kitchen table long after Lily had gone to sleep, just staring at the photo of us, the three of us from the park. Her arms wrapped around Lily, the sun in her hair, her smile so genuine it almost mocked me now. What had happened to that woman? Where had she gone? And more painfully, why hadn't she told me? Then, on the 27th day since she disappeared, a letter arrived. It wasn't typed. It wasn't stamped with any of her company's branding. Just a plain white envelope with my name written in careful, slanted script. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No return address, no date. Written in blue ink that wavered slightly as if her hand had trembled while writing. Adam, I don't expect you to understand. I'm not even sure I do, but I had to go. I had to step away from the noise, the cameras, the people telling me who I should be. Being with you and Lily, it was real. More real than anything I've known in decades. But it also terrified me. Because you saw me, not the version I've curated for the world, but the damaged, scared girl hiding behind all of it. I'm trying to undo what my father did to my heart. I've lived my whole life making decisions out of fear, out of guilt, out of expectation. And I can't live like that anymore. I need to find the part of me that was taken. I need to heal before I become someone Lily depends on. She deserves someone whole. You both do. I hope you can forgive me for how I left. I just didn't know how else to go. Vits, that was it. No return address, no contact number, no promise of when or if she'd come back. I read it 3 times before folding it neatly and slipping it back into the envelope. There were so many things I wanted to scream at that paper. Anger, confusion, sadness. And yet, there was one thing I couldn't deny. She was hurting. Not just from the recent media fallout or the confrontation with her father. She was unraveling from a lifetime of suppression. Every part of her identity had been shaped by someone else's expectations. Every decision calculated, every emotion hidden, every piece of her future prepackaged for her before she ever had a chance to choose it. She wasn't running from us. She was running from the version of herself that never had a chance to become real. Still, it didn't make her absence any easier. I tried to fill the void for Lily. We made more pancakes. We went to the park more often. We watched her favorite shows, laughed at her silly jokes, and read bedtime stories until she fell asleep mid-sentence. But I saw it in her eyes. The wondering, the longing, the sadness that came just before sleep took her. She missed Vivian. And no matter how much I tried, I couldn't be both parents, both anchors, both homes. For the first time since Lily was born, I felt like I was failing her. Until that night. It was late, almost midnight. Lily had finally fallen asleep after hours of restlessness. I sat alone in the living room, flipping through channels without watching anything. The apartment was dark except for the glow of the TV. Then came a knock on the door. Not loud, not rushed, but firm. I froze. It was too late for visitors, too quiet for coincidence. I rose slowly, cautious, unsure whether to feel hope or fear. When I opened the door, everything changed. Because standing on the other side wasn't Vivian, but someone I never thought I'd see again. When I opened the door that night, everything inside me braced for Vivian. I had played that moment in my head for weeks. Her tearful eyes, her trembling voice, her return to the home she left without warning. But instead, what I saw made my breath catch in my throat for entirely different reasons. She stood there in the hallway, framed by dim light, holding a small bouquet of daisies, Lily's favorite flower. Her clothes were simple, her makeup almost non-existent, and her hair was pulled back as if she hadn't planned this visit at all. But her eyes, they held purpose, fear, hope, all tangled together. The first words out of her mouth weren't for me. "Are you awake?" she asked softly, holding up the flowers like a peace offering. "I brought these for her." My pulse pounded in my ears as I stepped aside and nodded. "She just fell asleep." "But she'd want to see you." Vivian smiled, the kind of smile that trembled at the edges. "I don't want to wake her. I want her to know I'm here again. If she'll let me be, I didn't ask where she'd been." Not yet. I didn't press for explanations or demand closure. Something in her voice told me she had carried enough guilt already. But Lily didn't wait for explanations either. As if summoned by some invisible thread between their hearts, she came padding out of her room in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes, hair messy from sleep. When she saw who was standing at the door, she didn't pause. She didn't ask questions. She didn't hesitate. "Mommy Vivi!" she shouted, running forward. Vivian dropped the flowers without even noticing and knelt just in time to catch Lily in her arms. The embrace that followed was more than a hug. It was forgiveness. It was healing. It was everything that had been missing for the past month. They held each other for what felt like an eternity. When they finally pulled apart, Lily looked up at her, eyes wide and innocent. "I missed you every day." Even the days I was mad, Vivian laughed softly, brushing hair from Lily's face. "I missed you more than you'll ever know." I stood nearby, watching them, unsure of where I fit in that moment. I had carried Lily's heartbreak. I had read the letter that tried to explain what couldn't be said. I had absorbed the silence and stayed strong because I had to. But now, watching the two of them together, I wondered what came next, and whether I was still part of it. Vivian turned to me, still holding Lily close. "I want to be in her life," she said, her voice suddenly serious. "Not just as a visitor, not just as a memory. I want to stay, if you'll let me." She wasn't talking about me, not entirely. She meant Lily. She meant that fragile, irreplaceable bond they had begun to form. And now she wanted to rebuild it. Not out of obligation, not for redemption, but because something inside her had shifted. And then she said it. "I want us to be a family." My heart lifted, but then immediately dropped again. She wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was looking at Lily. That distinction hit harder than I expected. I nodded slowly, still unsure how to feel. "What does that mean exactly?" Vivian hesitated, then stood. "It means I want to be her grandmother. Fully. Properly. I want to be there for her school plays and birthdays and scraped knees. I want to braid her hair and help her with homework and teach her how to make pancakes without burning them." Lily giggled. "You always burn them." Vivian smiled at her, then looked back at me. "I'm not asking to change our arrangement. I'm not even asking for anything more than what you're willing to give. I just want her to know she's not missing anything, that she's got someone who will love her unconditionally, and that she's not alone in this world." Her words were genuine, unrehearsed. They didn't come with pressure or expectation. And yet, something inside me ached at what wasn't being said. I had fallen for Vivian, not just because she was Lily's grandmother or because of her tragic past, but because, somehow, through all the chaos, she had found a way into my heart. But in this moment, she wasn't asking to be part of my life. She was asking to be part of Lily's, and I didn't know where that left me. I forced a smile and nodded. She'd love that. We spent the evening together. Quiet, gentle, simple. Vivian read Lily her favorite story, tucked her into bed, and sat beside her until she fell asleep with a hand wrapped around her wrist like a promise. She came back to the living room and sat across from me, fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. "I still don't know if I belong here," she admitted, "but I know I want to." I looked at her, searching for something behind the words. "Is this just about Lily?" Vivian's eyes didn't waver. "Right now, yes." It hurt to hear, but I respected her honesty. The next day, everything changed. Vivian had agreed to meet with a journalist, a long-trusted media figure who wanted to write a story about her journey, not the scandal. It was meant to be small, local, human. But word spread fast. By the time we arrived at the park for the interview, there were 3 cameras, 2 assistants, and more questions than Vivian was ready to answer. Lily was there too, clinging to her hand, completely unaware of the pressure building around us. Vivian did her best to keep things focused on the story of reconnection, of healing, of forgiveness. She spoke eloquently, even vulnerably, about finding her granddaughter, about rediscovering purpose, about stepping away from a world that never really saw her. The interviewer turned to Lily at one point and knelt down with a microphone. "Sweetheart," she asked gently, "what's it like having 2 mommies, one in heaven and one here with you now?" Lily tilted her head, thoughtful. Then she looked up at Vivian with a bright, unwavering gaze and asked, loud enough for every camera to catch it, "Will you marry my daddy now?" The world stopped. Vivian froze. The cameras zoomed in, and I didn't even breathe. Her reaction wasn't what anyone expected, Not the media, not me, not even herself. The question hung in the air with a weight far heavier than the first time it was asked. The words were the same, but everything else had changed. This time it wasn't a moment of childish curiosity blurted out in the middle of a shopping mall. This time, it was a pointed, sincere, and deeply loaded plea, spoken by a child who knew exactly what she was saying, and who was saying it in front of the world. Lily's voice cut through the breeze, through the hum of cameras, through the careful silence Vivian had wrapped around herself since she returned. "Will you marry my daddy now?" Every lens turned toward Vivian. The journalist paused mid-note. Even the assistants, who were trained to remain neutral, lowered their clipboards in stunned silence. This wasn't in the prep sheet. This wasn't part of the story. Vivian didn't answer right away. Her eyes widened, her lips parted, and for a long moment she just stared at Lily. Then, slowly, her gaze shifted to me. The expression on her face wasn't fear. It wasn't even shock. It was something more complicated, like she was standing on the edge of something enormous and couldn't decide whether to jump or run. I wanted to rescue her, to step in and explain that Lily didn't understand the pressure she was putting on her, that this wasn't the time or place for something so personal. But before I could say a word, Vivian knelt down beside Lily and placed both hands gently on her shoulders. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "that's a very big question." Lily nodded, serious. "But I already asked you once, and you didn't say no." The crowd chuckled nervously, but Vivian didn't look away. She leaned forward, kissed Lily's forehead, and whispered something into her ear. Whatever she said made Lily smile, just slightly, and step back, satisfied for now. Then she stood and walked straight over to me. Her heels sank slightly into the grass, her hair swaying in the breeze, her eyes still full of whatever storm she had kept buried during the interview. She came close, closer than we'd been since she left, and leaned in, close enough that only I could hear what she was about to say. "I don't have an answer," she whispered, "because I'm still trying to understand the question." I blinked, unsure of what she meant, but before I could ask, she pulled back and said something that stunned me even more. "Give me 1 month. No promises, no labels, just time. If I can prove that I belong in your world, not just hers, I'll stay." Forever, I didn't respond immediately. The crowd was still watching, waiting for some big conclusion, some fairy tale ending. But there wasn't one. Not yet. Vivian turned to the cameras, smiled politely, and ended the interview herself with a simple, "Thank you all for coming." That's all for today. The media scattered. The assistants followed her lead. Lily ran off to chase a butterfly, and suddenly it was just the two of us again, standing at the edge of something we couldn't define. "What does that mean?" I asked quietly. "Prove you belong?" She looked at me with an honesty I hadn't seen in her before. "It means I need to learn who I am when I'm not performing, when I'm not protecting an image. I've been rich so long that I forgot how to be real. But you and Lily, you made me feel something I thought was lost forever. I just need to know if I can carry that into the life I left behind." "And what happens if you decide you can't?" I asked, already dreading the answer. She reached out and took my hand. "Then I walk away, for good. But not without giving it everything I have first." That night, she didn't go back to her penthouse suite or the gated mansion on the hill. She came home. With us. She asked to sleep on the couch, said she wanted to start where she left off. That first week, she cooked more than she had in her entire adult life. Pancakes that burned around the edges, spaghetti without salt. She bought groceries without checking labels and folded laundry with too much detergent. But she smiled more, laughed more, stayed longer. She learned to walk Lily to school and help her with math homework. She came to open house night, sat in the second row and cried during a finger painting presentation like it was an art gallery exhibition. She was trying, really trying, and for a while, it felt like the month she promised would end exactly as we hoped. like we were finally becoming something whole. But as the days passed, I started to notice something. Small at first, then impossible to ignore. She was receiving calls late at night. She stepped outside to answer them. When she came back in, her eyes were clouded, distracted, distant. She smiled for Lily. She laughed during dinner. But the moment the room went quiet, her shoulders sank as if the weight of the outside world had returned. I didn't press her. I wanted to give her space, but deep down I knew whatever she was facing wasn't going away, and she was trying to shield us from it. One night, as she sat quietly beside me on the couch, she placed a hand over mine and said, "I thought the hardest part was walking away. But I was wrong. The hardest part is trying to live in two worlds at once." I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to admit. "You don't have to choose tonight." "I might have to choose soon," she said softly. Sooner than I expected? And she was right. Because 3 weeks into her month, just when it felt like we might truly find, way to make this work, a letter arrived at our door. It wasn't addressed to her, it was addressed to me. The envelope bore the logo of her family's holding company, the empire her father built and she now controlled. Inside was a document, notarized and coldly worded. A legal warning. A clause. A condition that I didn't even understand at first, until I read the final sentence. If you continue to maintain personal relations with Vivian Holloway while in custody of her biological granddaughter, further legal action regarding guardianship may be pursued in accordance with Holloway trust policy. It wasn't signed by Vivian. It was signed by her father. He wasn't finished. That single letter forced her to confront the truth and make a choice none of us were ready for. When Vivian walked through the door with a single suitcase and nothing else, something about the way she looked at our cramped apartment told me she was walking into unfamiliar territory. The space that had always felt small to me suddenly seemed even smaller. She had traded marble floors for cracked tiles, a view of the skyline for a view of a parking lot, and satin bed sheets for a pull-out couch that creaked every time someone moved. But she didn't complain. Not once. She unpacked slowly, carefully placing her few belongings in the hall closet, hanging up the only 2 jackets she brought, and folding a plain sweater over the back of the couch like it was the most natural thing in the world. I watched her from the kitchen, unsure whether to feel proud of her humility or sorry for the fact that she didn't even know how to turn on our faulty stove. The first night, Lily couldn't stop grinning. She climbed into Vivian's lap as if no time had passed, as if she hadn't spent weeks asking me why her other mommy had vanished without saying goodbye. Vivian read her the same bedtime story she'd read the night before she left, and Lily made her promise not to disappear again. Vivian didn't speak right away. Then she kissed Lily's forehead and whispered, "Not unless you want me to." But even as she smiled, I could see it. She was struggling. She burnt toast. She overflowed the washing machine. She didn't know the names of half the shows Lily liked. And when the school sent home a list of supplies for a class project, she asked if she needed to fax it back. Vivian was used to staff, assistants, protocols. Here, there was no one to rely on. Just us. Just life in its rawest, messiest form. Still, she tried. Every day she tried harder. She woke up early, despite being a night owl her entire adult life. She made breakfast even if it came out bland or too salty. She walked Lily to school in sneakers that didn't match her designer coat. She started doing the grocery shopping, though the first few trips ended in awkward stares when she asked where the organic pine nuts were. And she began to open up. Not just to Lily, but to me. At first, it came in pieces. A story about her childhood here, a regret buried deep there. She told me about the first time she ever spoke up against her father and how he didn't yell. He just went silent for a month. She told me about the man she loved, the one who never got to meet his daughter, and how she sometimes dreamed of what might have been if she had run away with him instead of submitting to the pressure. We had dinners where we laughed so hard we forgot about everything outside our walls. And we had evenings where she sat silently, staring out the window, lost in memories she wasn't ready to share yet. There were days we argued about parenting styles, about how she overcorrected Lily's posture, about whether you really needed a spoon for every side dish. But even our arguments were layered with something new: care. Lily thrived during that month. She had 2 people who tucked her in, 2 people who showed up for school events, 2 people who remembered how she liked her sandwiches cut. And for a moment, for the first time since my wife had died, I allowed myself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, this was what healing looked like. Vivian began to change, too. She stopped checking her phone every 5 minutes. She started leaving it on silent. She began helping Lily with homework, even if she had to Google the math terms first. She discovered our local bakery and insisted their cinnamon rolls were better than anything her chefs ever made. She let Lily paint her nails horribly. She danced in the living room to cheesy pop songs without worrying about who might see her. One night, after Lily had gone to bed, she sat next to me on the couch, her hair messy from baking and her shirt stained with flour. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I used to think I was powerful because I built an empire. But I've never felt more powerful than I do right now, just being Lily's grandmother." I didn't say anything. I just held her hand, because I knew what she meant. But as the days ticked down, something in her began to shift again. It started with one phone call. She took it in the hallway and came back quiet. Then another, where she locked herself in the bathroom for nearly an hour. Her eyes were distant again. Her phone, once forgotten, was always in reach. Her laugh came slower. Her smile faded quicker. She tried to hide it. She still read bedtime stories, still helped with projects, still made pancakes with too much baking soda. But I could see the storm behind her eyes, the way she stared into space when she thought I wasn't watching. Then, just 2 days before the month was over, she came home late. Her coat was soaked from rain, her hands trembling, and I could tell something had broken again. "There's a deal," she said quietly, hanging her coat without looking at me. "A merger. It's bigger than anything I've ever handled. It's been in negotiation for years, and it's finally moving forward." I nodded, slowly, already sensing where the conversation was heading. "They need me to go to Zurich. Final meetings, final approvals. It'll be 10 days, maybe 12. Lily came running in, holding a drawing she made. Vivian knelt and smiled, complimented the colors, hung it on the fridge, and promised to help her make another one tomorrow. But the moment Lily left the room, her shoulders collapsed again. "I don't want to go," she said, "but if I walk away from this, everything I've built could collapse." I stayed silent, because the truth was, I understood. She had poured decades into that empire, years of sacrifice, compromise, survival. Walking away from it wasn't just hard, it was a kind of death, a letting go of the only identity she had known before us. "But if I go," she added, eyes welling up, "what happens to this? What happens to us?" I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what would survive the distance, the pressure, the weight of 2 worlds pulling her in opposite directions. Because in 48 hours, she would have to choose between a $1 billion deal or us. I thought she would leave. Everything pointed to that. Her silence, her stress. The way she stared out the window during dinner like her thoughts were somewhere else entirely. The Zurich deal wasn't just another business move. It was a landmark moment that could redefine her legacy. Billions were on the line. Global headlines, historic signatures, the culmination of years of corporate warfare and strategic maneuvering. She stood at the threshold of everything she had built. And then, she walked away from all of it. I'll never forget the moment she told me. She came home in the middle of the afternoon, the smell of rain still clinging to her coat, her hair wind-tossed from the city. I was sitting on the couch, half reading a book, half waiting for the other shoe to drop. She stood there for a long time, looking at me, then at the tiny paper crown Lily had made for her earlier that week, still sitting proudly on the kitchen table. "I'm not going," she said, voice steady. I closed the book slowly. "You're not going to Zurich?" She shook her head. "I sent them a letter this morning. Declined the offer, declined the merger, declined the promotion." I walked away. My heart didn't know whether to leap or ache. "But that deal—" I started, but she cut me off gently. "That deal would have owned me, every moment, every thought, every part of me, and I'm tired of being owned." She crossed the room and sat beside me. Her fingers intertwined with mine, warm and resolute. "I don't care what the board says. I don't care what the press says. I've spent my whole life chasing control, power, admiration, trying to fill a space inside me that only grew emptier with every success. But you and Lily, you didn't want anything from me. You didn't expect anything. You just loved me." I wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was hold her tighter. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. The headlines came like a flood. Holloway quits billion-dollar deal in stunning move. Board calls emergency meeting amid Holloway's refusal. Is love costing the Queen of Hospitality her crown? Reporters dissected her decision from every angle. Commentators branded her impulsive, emotionally compromised, reckless. Words they reserved for powerful women when they stopped playing by the rules. Her board issued a statement that was cold and calculated. They didn't say her name. They used terms like leadership transition and strategic realignment. Behind closed doors, they tried to force her out. Behind microphones, they questioned her mental state. Every camera pointed at her, every voice demanding an explanation. But she didn't flinch. She walked into every meeting, every press conference, every ambush outside her apartment with the calm of someone who had finally made peace with herself. She didn't fight back with fire. She answered with grace. She smiled, she listened, and then she simply said, "I'm not here to defend my peace. I'm here to live it." Lily didn't understand the chaos. She only knew that Vivian was home every night, that she still braided her hair in the morning, that she still helped her feed the fish, helped her practice spelling, kissed her goodnight. And that was enough. As for me, I watched this woman I had once thought was untouchable become more grounded, more human, more real than I had ever seen her. And I knew, without hesitation, that I didn't want to imagine a life without her. So I planned something. Something simple. Something right. I waited until a Sunday. A quiet one. We took Lily to the same park where everything had begun, where that innocent question had first been asked by a curious little girl who saw something the rest of us hadn't yet dared to believe in. The grass was damp with dew, the air carried the crisp promise of spring, and the benches were mostly empty. We sat under the same tree. Lily played nearby, giggling as she chased soap bubbles we had brought from home. Vivian looked up at me, brushing a strand of hair from her face, unaware that I was carrying something in my pocket heavier than anything I'd ever owned. I took her hand. She looked at me, confused at first. Then her eyes widened as I began to speak. Not loudly, not dramatically, but from a place that had waited years to be heard. I didn't plan this when we first met. I didn't know we'd be sitting here, rebuilding something from the ashes of a past neither of us asked for. But I know now, without question, that I want you beside me. Not as Lily's grandmother, not as the woman who gave up an empire, but as the person who taught me how to love again. Her lips parted, tears filling her eyes before I could even finish the sentence. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the ring. Not extravagant, not flashy, just a simple band with a stone that sparkled quietly in the morning sun. I barely got the words out. "Will you marry me?" Before she was nodding, before she was laughing and crying all at once, before she threw her arms around me in a rush of emotion so raw and overwhelming that I forgot the rest of the world existed. Lily clapped from a distance, running over with wide eyes and asking, "Is she gonna say yes this time?" Vivian scooped her up into her arms and whispered, "Yes, sweet girl." 1,000 times. Yes. The days that followed were a blur of happiness. We began planning the wedding. Not grand, not lavish, but intimate. Something real, something honest, something that honored the journey we had taken to get here. Friends sent congratulations. Some colleagues offered quiet support. Others stayed silent. But we didn't care. We had each other. And we had Lily. The invitations went out. The dresses were chosen. The date was set. Everything was perfect. Until, just days before the ceremony, we received a package on our doorstep. No return address, no note, just a small black box wrapped in velvet. Inside was an old photograph. Vivian as a child, standing beside a woman none of us had ever seen before, except for in a single faded newspaper clipping buried deep in Vivian's family history. It was her mother, the one Vivian believed had died decades ago. But the note tucked behind the photo shattered everything we thought we knew. "There's one more secret your father never told you. I've been waiting for the right moment to come forward. I'll see you at the wedding." Just when we thought the past had released us, one final twist arrived, waiting to change everything. The day of our wedding didn't come with orchestras or velvet carpets. There was no paparazzi, no designer gowns flown in from Paris, no opulent venue filled with crystal chandeliers. What we had instead was something rarer: peace. The ceremony took place in a small garden behind the local library, surrounded by trees that had stood quietly for decades, much like the truths we had only just uncovered. There were folding chairs set in 2 neat rows, a simple white arch wrapped in lavender. Lily scattered flower petals with the concentration of a surgeon and the joy of a child who had waited years for this day to come. Our guests were few: close friends, teachers from Lily's school, Vivian's assistant, who had become something like family. The air carried laughter and soft music from a playlist I'd made the night before. Vivian wore a pale blue dress, not white, and I wore the same suit I'd worn to her board's last public event. Only this time the tie was gone, the collar open, the smile on my face genuine. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about completion. But just before the vows, something happened. The officiant had just asked everyone to rise when a woman appeared at the edge of the garden path. She walked slowly, leaning slightly on a cane, dressed in a soft gray dress and a wide-brimmed hat. No one recognized her. She wasn't on the guest list. She hadn't RSVP'd, but something about her presence stilled the entire space. Vivian turned first. Her eyes squinted, then widened. The color drained from her face. "Mom?" she whispered. Gasps rippled through the guests. The woman stepped closer. Her face was older, lined by years, but unmistakable. Her jaw, her eyes, her posture, they mirrored Vivian's in ways no one could deny. She removed her hat and looked directly at her daughter, with tears already falling. For a moment, no one moved. Then Vivian stepped down from the altar and walked toward her like a ghost was calling her home. "I thought you were dead," she said, voice cracking. "I know," the woman said softly. "He made sure you did." A hush fell over everyone. The truth hung in the air like thick fog. The woman reached into her small purse and pulled out a worn envelope. She handed it to Vivian with trembling fingers. "I wrote you this letter the day they took you away. I tried to send it. I tried so many times. But he always found out. He told me if I kept reaching out, he'd ruin your life before it ever began. And I believed him. I stayed silent because I thought it was the only way to keep you safe." Vivian opened the letter with shaking hands. Her lips moved silently as she read, her eyes filling with more tears. "I begged him to let me see you," the woman continued, "to tell you that I loved you, that I never wanted to leave. But he said you were better off without me. I was weak, unfit, a distraction." The letter slipped from Vivian's hand and drifted to the grass. "You didn't leave me," she whispered. You didn't abandon me." "No," her mother said. "I never stopped waiting. I came to every event he let me near. Watched you from crowds. I saw your graduation, your first speech, your wedding, from a distance. Always from a distance." Vivian collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing. The two women clung to each other as though trying to make up for every stolen year with one impossible embrace. No one spoke. Even Lily stood still, holding the basket of petals against her chest, as tears filled her eyes. After several long minutes, Vivian turned back to me. Her mascara was smudged, her hands still shaking, but she smiled. "Now," she said, "we can finally begin." The ceremony resumed. Her mother took a seat in the front row. I took Vivian's hands in mine, and as the vows began, it felt like we weren't just getting married. We were binding generations, healing wounds we hadn't created, but had chosen to mend. I promised her more than love. I promised her space to grow, to fail, to become. She promised me trust, laughter, and the freedom to build a life without fear. Lily stood between us as we said the final words, her smile brighter than the sun that bathed us in gold. As we kissed, the crowd applauded. But it wasn't the sound that mattered. It was the feeling of home, of wholeness, of finally being exactly where we were meant to be. Later, during the small reception under twinkling garden lights, Vivian danced with her mother. Lily joined them halfway through, giggling as she spun in circles. I watched them with a heart fuller than I ever thought possible. So many things could have gone differently. One missed moment, one lost connection, one more lie left unchecked. And none of this would have happened. But somehow, through grief and distance and generational silence, we had arrived at a place none of us imagined. Vivian turned to me that night and whispered, "You didn't just give me love. You gave me back my life." And I smiled, holding her hand and Lily's in mine, knowing that the journey we had taken was never about one decision, one proposal, one miracle. It was about a child's innocent wish, a question asked without fear or doubt, rooted in love. A question that changed everything. And that's the story of how my daughter's innocent wish brought together a shattered legacy and gave us all a second chance at love. A little girl's innocent question, "Will you marry my daddy?" sparks a life-changing journey filled with long-lost secrets, broken bonds, and a legacy waiting to be healed. What began as a chance encounter turns into a powerful story of family, love, and second chances across 3 generations. Watch till the very end to witness the emotional twists that brought a shattered family back together. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more heart-touching content. Hit the bell icon so you never miss our next emotional journey.